Hey everybody, welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard. It is Dan, and today we're diving into a topic that I've covered before, one that is, I hate to say it this way, near and dear to my heart, but it is important, which is domestic violence. And as my regular viewers know, I am a victim of domestic violence and used to run a support group for other male victims. But today we're going to take a little bit of a different approach and tell the other side of the story, if you will. One that really isn't based on stats or the quote unquote narrative, which is where we often lose ourselves in, but more so, we're going to come at it from what it's like for the victim, the perpetrator, and those around them. And I think you'll find this really compelling and interesting because it is a different take than you'll normally hear, and one I think that will resonate with a lot of you. So I'm going to be welcoming to the show my guest, Michael Clark, who's just released a brand new book called The Truth About You, which follows a family caught in the, I'll call it crossfire of love, talks about control and legal systems issues. And it's not really a conversation per se about the book, although it is, but it's about how the truth gets buried, how abuse can be hidden in plain sight, and really understanding why the system treats it the way it does. I'm kind of riffing off the top of my head. Let me just bring him on the show. Welcome to the show, Michael. What'd you think of all that?
Great introduction. Thank you, Dan. And it's so nice to be here and be with you in this conversation.
Yeah, I kind of pulled that one out of my butt because normally I don't script those. I just kind of go with them. And I will preface by saying you might hear a thunderstorm in the background because it's literally over the top of my head and my little girl Molly's running around. But Michael, I am so happy that you agreed to join me on the show and to talk about the book and really the topics within it. But before we dive into that, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, you've already said that the book and our topic today is about domestic violence. So probably the appropriate thing for me to do is to let you know I'm a former domestic violence offender. 20 years ago, I was arrested twice for domestic violence. And Dan, I want to say for you and your audience, I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew that it was harmful to my partner. I knew that I could get into trouble, not only relationship trouble with her, but also with the law. And yet that behavior just still came out in those moments of conflict. So that's a little bit about my background. And as I worked and tried to figure out why do I do this, and more importantly, how do I stop, I had this notion, this thought, hey, maybe if I ever figure this out, I can help some other folks who find themselves in that same place. People who have been violent or abusive with their partner, who want to change. And so here, about 8.5 years ago, I started a nonprofit organization. It's called the Ananias Foundation, and that really is our mission: is to provide guidance for those who have been violent or abusive with their partner, but who want to change. And so that's what we do.
Uh,
So I guess that's the pertinent part of it. A little demographic background about me. I am married. My wife Lynn and I will celebrate our 7-year anniversary here in just a few days. Pretty excited about that. And I spend about half my time in my home in Iowa, where I am right now, and the other half of the time I have a home in Arizona. So uh, it's a little bit about me.
well, that's awesome. And just for the record, I'm celebrating my 11th anniversary and tomorrow as we're recording this. So,
Congratulations.
yes. Well, I always say I've been married for 35 years just to three different women. But anyway, little side joke that I run. Michael, first of all, I want to say to you, I applaud you for being so upfront about your past, right? It's something that most perpetrators would never do. They never want to admit their guilt, right? And we're not trying to excuse it in any way, but sometimes there are reasons behind why it happens and all that, and maybe we'll dive into some of that. But I just want to say up front that I welcome that you've been so open about it, and kind of how it weaves through the book also. And it's something we need more of. We need to have more discussion from all sides. We always hear the victim side, mostly on the women's side, but from the men, it's getting more and more out there. But you rarely, if ever, hear from perpetrators,
Right.
and that's it. That's an important part of the conversation because a lot of times, we get lost in the weeds on that. We want to blame them. We want to castigate them, make them into
Villainize.
pariahs, all of that stuff. But they are also human beings. And we need to acknowledge that. We may not want to, but we need to acknowledge that. And none of us is perfect. I know I've made mistakes in my past, many of them. And being able to own up to them is how you change from that. And I think that's what you've done and are working to do with your organization. Would that be correct?
Right, exactly. I didn't really want to become a poster child for domestic violence, but really for me being able to tell my story, not only of where I was, but how I changed, and to give other people hope that change is possible, which is our byline at the Ananias Foundation, change is possible. Um, if that helps someone by sharing my story, then at least what I've been through um, can be used for good and good to help other people.
And that's exactly what it is, right? You're taking your past, which wasn't great, and using it for good. That speaks to you as a human being, and I applaud you for that. So, having
Thank
said all that, let's really just kind of dive in and talk about the book, which is called The Truth About You. And just kind of let's give the audience a little bit of flavor of what it's about. And really, I also want to know why you chose to write it now.
Yeah, so let me start with the second question of why I chose to write it. And in my own journey, but also in my work with perpetrators in the Ananias Foundation, I've come to recognize that there are a lot of preconceived notions, perceptions that, and maybe even myths that are not really true about domestic violence and about domestic violence offenders. And we could say, well, yeah, but so what? I mean, so we get the story wrong. Does that matter? But it really does matter in three important areas. One is if we're going to protect all the victims, we have to talk about the truth about domestic violence being something that both men and women do, and both men and women can be victims of. Secondly, if we're going to help those who have caused harm to change, we've got to understand the the reason why people commit domestic violence. And the narrative is that we're just evil, awful people who think we're entitled, and we do this consciously. That's really not the truth about why people might be violent or abusive in their relationships. It really goes back more to the emotional internal wounds, traumas that we've faced, and how we react to different situations. So there's another one of those myths about not only who, but why. And then we end up with a lot of injustices in our society. And one of those injustices is we think, well, people can't change. And again, if it's about them just being naturally an awful person, maybe you would come to that conclusion, but that's not the truth. And so there is hope for change, and there is a process for change. And if we knew that, we would actually be able to help people change, not only eliminating abuse in their relationships, their current or their future relationships, but it's good for them too. They're going to feel so much more peace, so much better about their life when they experience that healing and change. So that's why it's so important that we have this discussion and begin to change that narrative and dispel some of those myths. And that's really why I wrote this book.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made there is that, you know, people can change. And one of the things I'll broaden it to say America loves is a resurrection story, right?
Right.
The person that falls down. We love to knock people down, first of all, but we also love it when they build themselves back up. The one exception, I think, to that is domestic violence perpetrators, right?
Exactly.
We never give them a pass. And in some ways, I understand it, right? In some ways, I'm probably guilty of it. I'll say that. But the reality is, as I said a few minutes ago, perpetrators are human beings also. We all make mistakes, and none of us are perfect. So we need to have the ability to allow them forgiveness, if you will, if they genuinely change, right? And I think
Right.
part of the issue is, have they genuinely changed? Because I've had experts say they will never change. I've had other experts that say absolutely they can change, right? It's I think you're on that side of the equation, and
Well, I'd like to think so because I'd like to think I'm one in that category.
exactly,
Right.
right? Yeah. I mean, but to be fair, there is the other side of it, and I always try and bring that out. And I don't think that side is being fair. And I always try and couch it to people to say, I'm 62 right now. The man I was at 22, 32, 42, 52 is not who I am now, right? So while I've never been a perpetrator, I have done things in the past that I regret. If you're going to judge me based on those 40 and 50 years ago, when I haven't done anything like that, that's not fair to me, right? I have changed in that regard. And that's, I think, what we need to apply with this circumstance. And I think that's one of the things about the book that I think is so important is that you're talking about the situation, giving an understanding, right? One of the things I really liked about it was that you were kind of delving into the mindset, and we're going to dive into it a little bit, but the mindset behind it. And I don't know whether that was intentional or not, where you were kind of, and maybe, again, I worked with domestic violence victims, still do, but I worked with them for years, men. But hearing how, the victim in the story, and like I can relate to every single thing that was going on, right? It was resonating with me personally as well. And you were kind of sharing the mindset with it. And it goes
Right.
back to something I saw. I'm one of those weirdos, Michael. I read everything. I read the whole prologues, the author's notes, all this. I'm just that's who I am, right? I have OCD. I admit it. Molly's running around the background, guys. You just got to deal with it. And one of the things that caught my eye was in your initial notes where you revealed that you're not just telling a story, right? Because it is a work of quotes fiction, right?
Right.
But in reality, though, what you're bringing to it is insights from your work with domestic violence offenders, right? But it begs a question that I wanted to ask, which is why did you take the fiction route to communicate the dynamics as opposed to the, let's call it the nonfiction route?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan. And there's really a couple big reasons. One is that in in a story, work of fiction, you can amalgamate a lot of different stories together. If I just told one person's story, well, that would show one facet of domestic violence and change and healing, or however that relationship played out. But then there are many, many others. We none of us have all the same story. So by amalgamating that into a work of fiction, I could bring many of those elements together into one story. The other thing, and this was probably the bigger reason, is to get this story out and read by a bigger audience. There's already research published about the truth about domestic violence, who commits it, why people do it, how they change. All of those are in the body of research. But how many of us bother to read that? Very few. Could even write a nonfiction book which would summarize that research. And I do have a previous book that has a lot of those elements in there. A book called From Villain to Hero about my journey. But again, it's nonfiction, and people are like, well, that sounds like a boring topic. I don't know that I want to read it.
Mm.
And so the idea is to put this into a fiction story, make it more appealing to people so that they read it. And we have great examples throughout literature history of um, literary fiction that told a fictional story, but it changed how people saw things. Things like To Kill a Mockingbird and what that how that changed how people saw racism, or 1984 of how that changed how people saw surveillance and government intrusion into privacy, or The Grapes of Wrath and how people saw poverty, or The Jungle and how people saw, how working classes were oppressed, but also bringing out food safety issues. And so all of those are works of fiction, yet they changed how people saw a particular issue. And storytelling is really one of the most powerful ways we have of shaping what people believe. And so that was the idea, is to take these stories and turn them into a fictional story which was still realistic and true in spirit, but not true in that there were actual events behind them.
And what's interesting about all that you just said is, as you mentioned, the data has been out there. I mean, I remember reading in the 90s, the fact that it was reciprocal most of the time, and men were victims and all that stuff, and yet we're still having that fight. And
Right.
I couldn't agree with you more that rehashing the data again and again isn't going to do anything. It hasn't done anything for really 50 years. Why would we expect it to now? That's the definition of insanity. So your approach, and I love that you illustrated other works, because absolutely that's the case, right? We see with things like The Jungle, or 1984, or there's a host I could come up with also. They truly changed culture, and they did so by telling a story, but getting the narratives that were behind the story out there in a way that people could, I think, better understand them. And that was one of the takeaways I had from the book, right? Is because I know all the data as cold as you do, right? And I try and relay that to my viewers. But and I've always said to them, share your story. Short stories will resonate far more than any amount of data or charts or anything else. And again, I applaud you for that. We're diving into the book, but really, why don't we kind of just, if you could, give us a quick synopsis for those that haven't read the book yet, because it just came out. Give us a little bit of the premise of the book. There are three main characters that are involved. Can you talk about them? And I wanted to ask you, as part of that, what, if anything, do they represent?
Yeah, and Dan, I'm going to expand your list from three to four main characters. So let me just kind of give you the setup for the book, the beginning of the book. The protagonist, a 20-something-year-old young woman named Lucy, who lives on her own, is notified that her mother's been battered by her stepfather, Greg. Her mother's name is Paula. Greg is the stepfather. And so Lucy and her sister Meg rally around their mother Paula, along with Paula's friends, to first of all check to see that she's okay, but then also they're given this assignment or this suggestion by mom's friends. Hey, you need to protect mom. You need to watch out for mom. You need to make sure that she's okay. And yet the girls aren't really sure how to do that or what that means. And then as the story progresses, they realize that mom, or they discover that mom really still has Greg in her life. And I think that's illustrative of a lot of relationships. 50% of abusive relationships stay together. People stay with the person that's causing them harm for a variety of reasons. And it's not always because they can't leave and they don't have the money and they don't have the options. Usually it's because I love this person. I fell in love with them. I want a relationship with them. I just want that relationship without the hurtful, harmful stuff. And so now they have a bigger task. How do we protect mom if she's not going to leave this relationship? So Sister Meg comes up with the idea, hey, why don't we install hidden surveillance cameras? The kind that, well, at least we read about, that could possibly be in your vacation rental, that you don't know is there, but somebody is watching you. So they do the research. Lucy does the research. They install the surveillance cameras, and then they start harvesting the videos. And they get a glimpse of what's really going on in the relationship dynamic between their mother, Paula, and between her stepfather Greg, who's there part of the time, over a differing amount of time. Now, this is really where the story starts to turn from the dominant narrative because, up to this point, you have the woman is abused and the man is the abuser, and, we need to protect the victim. But what Lucy sees in those videos is far different than that narrative. She sees her mother, honestly, acting out in really hurtful ways. And so she starts to get curious about, well, what really is going on? And is what I've been told about domestic violence true? Or is there another aspect? Is there a truth that is not being told here? And so Lucy in this story represents someone who comes in looking at this issue with an open mind, objectively weighing the evidence and making a decision based on the evidence of what she sees, what she discovers, what she hears in talking, not only with the experts in the domestic violence community, but also talking with Greg, who supposedly is the perpetrator here. And her sister Meg is completely on board with we've got to protect mom, completely bought into this dominant narrative of mom's the victim, Greg's the perpetrator. It's always this way, and despite the evidence, refuses to see a different story. So I'll stop there with the setup of the story, but that's a little bit about what the story is about, and kind of how those two sisters are taking very different approaches towards thinking about this issue of domestic violence.
And I think the takeaway that I had when I was reading it is that Lucy's me, if I may, right? In a manner of speaking, right? I'm trying to get the truth out there and all that. And Meg is society. That was kind
Yeah.
of loosely speaking, right? It was kind of what I was taking away from it. And, I probably shouldn't have dismissed Meg earlier, but to me, Lucy really resonated with me. And that's why I focused on her.
I hope
Because
she resonates with
she
everyone. I
should.
mean,
She
I
abs
we all should be critical thinkers.
Yes, and we all need to be open-minded about being allowing ourselves to be critical thinkers because a lot of us when it comes to domestic violence we don't think that way, right? We have our preconceived notions which admittedly have been drilled into us, right, by
Right.
politicians, the media, Hollywood, you name it, for better part of 3 or 4 generations now. But it's something. If there's one takeaway that I would say people should get from the book and why you need to go read it is it gives you that perspective that allows you to see what most people aren't seeing, if I may put it that way, right? It allows you to open your eyes and be able to ingest what's really going on with a critical mindset, as you said, because a lot of what we believe is wrong, but guess what? A lot of what we believe is also right. We have to acknowledge that. Right? There's everybody wants to black and white everything. It's either this
Right.
or that. None of it is. It's all gray, and it kind of goes back to what I said before. We want to demonize perpetrators as evil, corrupt, horrible human beings, and sure, I'll agree. There's a part of them that is. That's not all of them, and they can change that part. And that's why it's so important to talk about that. One of the things I really wanted to bring up because I know my audience. Okay, so we're going to address the elephant in the room. Just get it out of the way so we don't have to talk about it anymore. But why did you choose to make the victim female and the perpetrator male? Because the argument they'll throw out, and that's why I want to eliminate it. And you've already kind of done that. Is that DV is primarily reciprocal, and in cases where it's not a lot of times it's the women who are the actual perpetrators. Why did you choose that perspective? And what would you say to the men watching this that to alleviate their concerns about that because they may be victims themselves and have been ignored and accused, and their mindset will be, well, he's not talking to me, but in fact you are.
Yeah, and great question. And the answer is, that while the story starts out that way, or seemingly starts out that way, I guess I would challenge you or any reader about jumping to conclusions that, in fact, Greg, the man, the stepfather in this story, is the real perpetrator, and that Paula, the mom, is the real victim. And that's the gray area that you talked about, Dan. And I think what the readers will see as the story goes is that, first of all, those are not so clear cut as the story comes out of what really happened that night where Greg got arrested. But what also is going on in the relationship, and is it really so clear cut who is victim and who is perpetrator? Or did we even get it right if we have to assign the perpetrator victim role to one or the other? We might not have gotten it right, and that's the journey I hope I'm taking the reader on through the book. So be patient with it. If you read the first couple of chapter and you go, oh, this is just another one of those domestic violence books where the man's the perpetrator and the woman's a victim, and yeah, we're gonna spend the whole book male bashing here. It changes.
And
I'll
that
just say it changes.
that's exactly why I asked it the way I did, because that's exactly what they're going to think, right? I kind of
Yeah,
knew.
fair enough.
I know what happens, but they don't, and that's why I asked it the way I did, right? I was kind of leading you down the path without you knowing it. I'm not
Thanks for
as
leading me into
I'm
that.
not as dumb as I look sometimes, but I know the audience well enough to know that a lot of them will just do exactly as you said. Oh, it's just another male bashing book. It's not. In fact, I argue it's the exact opposite, right? You're telling the story of men who are falsely accused or victims, or the ones that are in reciprocal violent relationships and all of that. I'm taking it at a very high level, and that's, again, this is why the book is so important, because you're going into the things we're not allowed to talk about, right? You're exposing the, I'm going to phrase it as the dark side, but really it's the light side, right? That we need to be getting out there and talking about this whole dynamic in a way that understands that we're not flawless. We all have our own way of contributing to the issue. I don't know if that's a
Right.
great way to put it. And that's why I think it's so important for people to understand that you may have this surface level of belief of what these characters are, which is why I put it the way I did, because I know that's what people are going to do. But you've got to look for the depth behind them. And that's what's so important about it, right? And that's really the big takeaway from the book, I think. So go
And
ahead. You got a
and
thought?
and Dan, to your point, when we don't talk about this issue truthfully, when we don't consider all of the nuances, we don't consider the what's behind the bad behavior, we don't consider the legal or the social implications of the policies that we create, then we end up with really bad solutions. And so again, one of the purposes of writing this book is to bring some of those things to light. And, you know, I was also struck by something that you said of people get an inside look. And that was, again, one of the objectives of writing the book is to show people kind of an inside perspective without encouraging anybody to actually go out and buy surveillance equipment and install it in people's homes. They get to live vicariously through the characters in the book to get that image instead of actually doing it themselves.
Yeah, and I will preface this by saying I am not an attorney. I don't want anyone to break the law, but I do coach people to get surveillance equipment when they're men, because the reality is it's he said, she said a lot of times, and I've been to the police trainings. I've attended numerous ones, and they're told, assume
It's
he's the one.
and I'm not an attorney either, but it's one thing to do it in your own home. It's another thing to do it in somebody else's home,
Well,
which is
that's it.
part of
Yeah,
this
well,
book.
and that's a
Yeah,
different thing. But yeah, so there is a great thank you for clarifying that, because there is a
yeah.
big difference there. All right, so you kind of led me down the path that I wanted to go into, which is one of the things that you kind of really dive into in the book is talking about restraining orders, right? And one of the things that resonated with me, because it's something I hear about constantly, and have for 25 years or so, working with men who are domestic violence victims or who are falsely accused of it, right? I often say restraining orders are handed out like Pez. I mean, you need the five magic words. I am afraid of him, and a woman will get a restraining order. It really is that simple most of the time. There are exceptions, all right? I'm generalizing. But, when you kind of go into the restraining order and how it's affecting all of the different characters and, the way they end up violating it. Both of them do, right? Because they're still seeing each other, interacting with each other. A particular restraining order normally in some way will say you can't go within 200 feet or 300 feet, or the numbers all change. But it's important because what you talk about is not the exception, it's the rule, right?
Right.
These orders are issued by a judge who, most of the time, it's less than 10 minutes he hears the case. He might read the paperwork that's gone in with it, the request for the order. But if at most he might hear from her if it's a woman. I'm going to generalize to a woman because it's mostly them, but understand it does go the other way, and let's be fair about that. But all she's got to go in and say the five magic words. She doesn't even have to show up. Sometimes it's just her attorney goes in, and she's got a restraining order. And a lot of times these victims end up regretting it. So there's that part of it as well. Mm-hmm. And it all comes into play, right? And, like you see Paula, who's one of the characters in the book, who's the one who gets the order, keeps seeing Greg, despite the fact that there's an order against him, right? And I'm very generalizing this. In fact, yes, he's violating the order, but in a manner of speaking, so is she, although it's not usually viewed that way. Can you speak to all of that, how common it is, and how, things like financial realities, it's tough to go from one house to two houses, or the whole host of them, can effectively end up basically rendering those orders almost useless?
It's a complex legal issue and social issue, really. And as someone who had a restraining order on me, and I think I passed the statute of limitations, I can say my then wife and I violated it, just very similar to what is written in the book. So there's the model for that. And the reality is, as you say, first of all, not everybody wants a restraining order. It's like, I want the abuse to stop. I don't necessarily want the other person out of the house. It's expensive. It's difficult to manage our relationship. It's difficult to manage our family. And so, it's a big, blunt tool that the legal system uses. In some cases, in a lot of cases, against the wishes of the person who was actually harmed, because they have mandated arrest policies in those states, and that's an automatic part of, you're going to get a restraining order whether you wanted it or not. And so there's that blunt tool that doesn't necessarily make sense, isn't necessary for the protection of the victim all the time. And hey, look, in certain cases, it certainly makes sense, and it is necessary, and we should have it. So I don't want to say that all restraining orders are malarkey. They're not. But as you pointed out, Dan, they're so ubiquitous. They're not thoughtfully given out, and it doesn't necessarily always serve the couple well that's involved in that. So, and the other part that I tried to bring out in this story is that sometimes, maybe way too often, those restraining orders are used as weapons for the victim, or the person who's deemed to be the victim, to use against the person who's being deemed to be the perpetrator. Oh, I can get you out of the house. I can control your movements. I can control whether I talk to you or not. I can control, what you do and what you can't do, because I have the power of this restraining order behind me. And I don't think that's at all the intent that the law had. But as happens so often whenever we create a law or an administrative policy or any sort of policy. It's often very blunt, it's not very focused, and there are unintended consequences that go along with all of those tools. And this is one that has a lot of baggage with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I cover all the time. They are, in effect, a false allegation that you're talking about, right? They're
Sure.
divorce now. I've interviewed attorneys on here, divorce attorneys. They're saying 70 to 80% of their cases now, they're seeing allegations that lead to things like TR. There's different terminology for them, PPOs, TROs, all them things. I go with TRO because that's what New York was when I was there. But um, they're so, as you said, ubiquitous now that they're watering down the reason for having them, right? Because everybody can get one. I'm exaggerating them to make a point. And they're so easy to get that they're not helping the people that, as you said, they were intended to help, right? The true victims that do need help. And
And
um,
want them.
yeah, but it leads me to a question, if I can tap into your expertise a little bit with that. So I've often talked about it from the victim side, why you would want one, the benefits, the pros, the negatives, all that stuff. I've never actually spoken to someone and said, how does it affect the perpetrator? So I could tap into you for just a kind of quick side note on this. How? So you said you had one placed against you. Can you talk a little bit for the audience, like what was your reaction when it happened? And moving forward, how has it affected your life?
Yeah, what happens is you're instantly homeless. So you can't go back to your home. Now, that might be a home that you bought and paid for, and your partner just happened to move in later, but it's not your home anymore because you were the perpetrator. So now you have to quickly find some place to go. Now, that if you have financial resources, maybe that's an extended stay hotel until you can rent an apartment or something like that, some other temporary housing. But then you also have the financial realities of you're paying for two rents or two mortgages, you're paying for utilities at two places. You're usually allowed to go get some of your personal belongings, and that's great. You can get your clothing and your toiletries, but what about your woodworking equipment that's in the garage? I've talked to people who it's like, well, that was a huge hobby for me, and I just lost access to that. Pets are another thing. Maybe I land an apartment, but they have a no pets policy, and so that beloved dog or cat or whatever your pet of choice is, like you're now separated from them. You can't see that. I have one client who was in that situation, and his ex partner gave his dog away.
Mm.
He didn't know what was going on. He found out, a couple months later that she'd given the dog away. It wasn't really her dog; it was always his dog, but he wasn't able to take it with him, and then the dog's gone.
Yeah, I mean, so many people think, well, these are a good thing. We should just automatically do them. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that argument many times. I know I have. But it brings to mind your this thing you just shared, something that someone shared with me late last week. They sent me a notification where a guy was in a stadium and his ex-wife, who had the TRO against him, was on the other side of the stadium. So they're literally, it's a soccer stadium, an entire stadium apart. He didn't even know she was there. But because she had that, she ended up having him arrested and put in prison or jail because of that. And that's why it's important for us to understand. He had no idea she was even there. So he didn't technically violate it. And I don't know yet what's going to be the result of that. But knowing what I've seen in the past, he's in trouble, right? And it's something that does need to be brought forth more, is that, these things are handed out so easily, but they have a dramatic effect on the person that's accused, that they're being placed against.
Right.
And that needs to be talked about also. We can't just go with the blanket, it's fine, it's a good thing, that'll teach him. Or even if he didn't do anything, it really doesn't harm him, because it does cause harm in many ways. I mean, losing a dog. I just lost one this week, right? So I can certainly relate to that. But it also, go ahead.
Yeah, and uh, parental alienation is another one of those areas.
Mm.
So another one of our clients, a man who went to see his daughter's, I don't know, music program or basketball game or some event at school. Well, his wife, who had the protection order against him, showed up. He had to leave. He couldn't, be there to see his daughter's performance, her event, because now his ex partner is there and he's prohibited from being there. So she got to mandate where she went, and she could move around freely. He could not, and sometimes that costs people those opportunities to spend time with their kids or with their friends uh, because of that. And again, I know people will say, well, yeah, but you should have thought about that before you battered that person. You should have thought about that before. And we haven't really talked about this a lot, but when we realize that this is, even the bad behavior is something that comes out most of the time, almost all the time, because of our own wounds, because of our past traumas and so forth. It's like an extra penalty. You not only got traumatized as a kid, but now you're going to get punished for the trauma that you had, and you're going to find yourself homeless and lose your friends and lose access to your kids, all because of something that you had happen to you that you just haven't figured out what it is and how to address it.
And Milo, that's an interesting point, right? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that you don't just become an abuser naturally. I mean, there are exceptions. I'm sure there are some that are out there, just like there are serial killers that just, that's who they are, right? But generally speaking, most abusers have been abused themselves in some way, usually in childhood. And I've had many experts tell me that. And, you know, knowing my situation and the abuse that I took, I can see why she was that way. I'm not trying to excuse it, don't get me wrong, right?
Right.
But she learned it. Without question in my mind, she learned it. I don't think it was inherent in her. It was something she was taught by her mother, right? So, can you speak to that a little bit? It's kind of sidetracking, I know, but I think this is important points for people listening to understand that. And you kind of highlighted it earlier, way back in the beginning. You don't want to be a perpetrator. You don't want to be violent. It, I don't want to. I don't know if this is the right way to say it. It just kind of happens, right? Sometimes.
Right.
Is that it sounds so poor of me to say it that way, but can you help me out here?
Dan, it's absolutely accurate. None of us, I mean, I've yet to meet anybody and, dealt with now in the thousands of people that have come through our program for help. I've yet to meet anybody that said, oh, yeah, I always wanted to be an abuser when I grow up. No. And without fail, people say, I never thought of myself as being abusive. I would have hated the idea of me being abusive, but here I am. And so even when we're doing those things that cause harm, we tend not to think of ourselves as abusive. First of all, we might not realize the harm that it's causing. Secondly, we might think this is just the normal rough and tumble wear and tear of relationships because that's what we've seen. And we're seeing it from our own experience. We're not always seeing it from the other person's experience on the receiving end of our behavior. So, and you mentioned, being abused, but it goes much bigger and broader than that. Certainly when we're abused, mistreated, ignored, are not getting the care that we should. Psychologists have this thing called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and they're very broad. And certainly physical, sexual, emotional abuse fits into that. But so does neglect. So does, getting yelled at a lot by one of your parents. I mean, there's all kinds of things that end up affecting and shaping how we see ourselves, how we see the rest of the world, and how much we feel like we have to respond to protect ourselves from getting hurt again. And I mean, that's certainly my story. And I will tell you that that is almost without fail everybody's story, is they have something in the background that's causing them to be um, to act out in ways, seeing things that are threatening when other people might not see them as threatening, and acting to stop that threat or to control that situation when other people who didn't have their same life experience would say, it's okay, I don't like it, but I don't have to step in and control it. So it's hard for people that don't have that, who haven't experienced that, to understand it. But I will tell you that it is a real thing, and I see it again, not just in my own story, but I hear this story played out again and again and again from men and women who come to us and are going, wow, I didn't think I was abusive. I really still don't like the idea of being called that because of all the stigma and the shame of that. But I guess I really kind of am, and I need to do something about it.
You brought up several points there that I think are so important to talk about because it does, again, gives us a flavor and a context for what's going on, the overall dynamic of it all, right? Is and trying to understand, if we want to address domestic violence, we need to have these conversations and talk about all the underlying stuff behind it, right? And what you're bringing up is stuff that you don't normally hear about. We talked earlier about people write books and they shove stats after stats. I mean, I've done videos where I shove stats. I admit it, right? But the underlying story is not told in those stats, and that's what you're kind of talking about. And you kind of talk about that throughout the book, right? And as you were kind of relaying that, I was flashing back a little bit, and like you see the abuse that Greg perpetrates, which is in many ways subtle. If I don't know if that's a great term for it, I mean, he comes across. I kind of think I relay this to you, is subtle, charming, that type of stuff, right? But you also see it coming from the other direction in a different way. At least that was my interpretation of it, right? And understanding that whether when you take that out of the book and put it out into real life, that is real life, right? Again, we talked about it earlier. It's not black and white. We are all bringing something to the table from our past. And that's why, having worked with countless victims, thousands at this point, and trying to help, one of the things they really struggle with is, because again, I work with men, why is she this way? Why does she do these things? Why does she react the way she does? And that's some of the stuff that you have in the book that was resonating with me, but where I struggle with is trying to bring that forward to them, right? Is how do we put that out there that they're reacting in some ways to us and what we're bringing to the table. And again, I'm not saying we're asking for it as victims. I don't
Right.
somebody will twist it into that. That's not what I'm saying. But we also play our role as victims, right? So, with all of that, like, and I think some of that was your intention maybe behind the book, either consciously or subconsciously. I don't know. Can you kind of talk
Well,
about that a little bit?
I'd like to think it was conscious. Yeah.
Okay.
When we start um, by seeing domestic violence and those who are violent and abusive or causing harm in their relationship, it really depends upon what set of assumptions we start with. If we assume that they are evil, nasty people who want power and control, and they want to rule the world, and they want to rule our relationships, and they'll do whatever they have to get their way, then, we make a whole bunch of other assumptions about them, about their motivation, about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it also begs for, we need to remove this person, we need to punish this person. And so the remedy, it begs a different remedy than when we start with a different starting point. The assumption that those people causing harm, that are hurting even their partners, people that they love in a relationship, are hurting people themselves. the quote hurt people applies. And when we start with that, now we see their motivation differently. Oh, they're hurting. If I'm a victim, they're hurting me because they're hurting, and they're not an awful person. And the danger of that is we don't want to have so much empathy that we just stay in those relationships. No, we should expect that behavior to stop and to change, but we don't see them as this incorrigible, he or she's never going to change and we just got to get out of the relationship. And we also believe that there is a path to change, a path to healing. We can heal the hurt that's causing the behavior. We'll get different behavior. And so it begs for a different solution in our relationships. It really begs for a different solution in our court system. Are we trying to help people heal their hurts, or are we trying to punish them or train them to have different behavior that we're really not helping them get up the hurts? And that's really one of the problems also talked about in the book with the batter's intervention program in most states, is that it's about behavior change, but it's not going deep enough to actually get to the source of that behavior and to provide any healing so that that change is real and it's permanent.
Can we talk about that briefly? Because, as I said, I ran a domestic violence support group for victims. But part of the training for that was I had to attend the other side, right, and see what that was like. And, this was when VAWA was first coming out, and all the training was based on the Duluth model, which I've long discredited. And
Still the predominant model.
It's by far, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's totally separate. You're going to get me fired up there. But anyway, but knowing that, and when you have these batter intervention programs, and the one that I went to, and again, I'm just observing basically from the back of the room, and I got angry because, and it wasn't, and it was all guys, by the way. There wasn't a single woman in the room, just to set that. This is 1999, okay? But I was getting angry at the guys, but it wasn't the guys that made me angry. It was what was coming from the front of the room towards them that was making me angry, because they were painting them. I mean, and as I look back on it now, they were painting them as the evil monster, so to speak.
Right.
And there was no subtlety at all behind it. There was no understanding or anything. And as I look back now, I think it's worse that they were in that for them. They're not going to change because of it. It might even cause some of them to unalive themselves.
Right.
And all of that. And it sounds to me, because you're involved with this, that really, if they're still using the Duluth model and that pushing that narrative, that with the exception of your organization, a lot of that what's out there is doing that same thing now. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and that's why the Ananias Foundation exists. I was really hoping somebody else would do this and pick up the ball and offer resources that were actually helpful, and I just didn't see anybody doing that. So I finally did. But you're right. Again, it's starting with that narrative that these people are evil, that they are intentional about their abuse. They like doing what they're doing. They want to be in control. And what do you do with that is you try to shame people into changing their behavior. What we know from psychologists and people who work with helping people change behavior is shame is a horrible motivator for changing behavior. And especially for those of us, which is most of us, who go to those programs and go, yeah, but that's not why I did what I did. I didn't get violent. I didn't say those hurtful, nasty things because I wanted to control my partner. I wanted my partner to stop hurting me. I wanted my partner to, treat me more kindly. Now, that might have been a misperception that they were even hurting me or treating me poorly to start with, but it felt very real to me or to them at the time. And it's like, so you go to one of those programs that's using the Duluth model, the power and control wheel, and you hear, you need to change your attitude. You think you're entitled to get your way, but you're not. You need to be more egalitarian in how you show up in your relationships. And for me, and I think a lot of the guys around me, as I looked around, it's like, yeah, but that's not what's going on in our relationship. That's not what's happening. Can you give us something helpful? Like, how do I handle it when my partner starts yelling at me? How do I handle it when they criticize me and I think it's unfair? What do I do? And then you fill in the blank with 100 or 1,000 different scenarios. And that's the most common question that I hear from people in our group. What do I do when, and then fill in the blank with this thing that happens that I know I'm not handling very well, but honestly, I don't know what to do. And I don't want this situation to continue, but I don't know how to handle it in a respectful, peaceful way that can be resolved, and I can still be okay in that scenario.
So when you're working with them, because as I'm listening to you talk about that, and I'm thinking back, right? Flashbacks are coming. And having been in that room and seeing what was thrown at those men, and to put it a different way, they were being victim blamed in a manner of speaking, because as we talked about, a lot of times they've been abused. It's learned behavior, and we're telling them, don't do that, you awful, awful human being. And they're like, but it happened to me, and you don't care about that, right? It's
right.
And that's what's been going on for 35, 40 years now. And you're trying to change that and change the approach. I got to ask, as you're doing that, what's been the response you've gotten from other organizations, maybe politicians, judges, and all that? What are they seeing about the work that you're doing? And do they actually see the benefit to it, or are they blinded still?
Well, so good question. Early on in starting the organization, I reached out to like my state's domestic violence research DVRC resource convention or whatever. And as soon as they found out what I was doing, and that it was taking more of a trauma-informed psychological healing approach, then they wanted nothing to do with me. They actually stopped talking to me.
Color me shocked.
Yeah, and so I, quite honestly, Dan, some of the times that I've made those efforts to, reach out to other organizations that are involved in this, there is definitely an ideology around domestic violence of what causes it, who does it, and what we need to do with those people. And if you don't subscribe to their ideology, and I want to emphasize ideology, it's not based on research, it's how they see the world. If you don't subscribe to that, then they're not going to have a conversation with you. So kind of early on, I just concluded that the best thing I could do is to do what I know is right, and whether anybody thought it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I had a fair amount of confidence based on the research, based on my own experience, and quite honestly, based on the very positive response I got from people who went through our program. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so helpful. This makes sense. I went to one of those other programs. It didn't help. It didn't make sense. They just wanted to tell me what a horrible person I was. And so it really, that confidence grew that what we're doing is the right thing. Now, I realize whether it's what we do at the Ananias Foundation, our work and our approach is not going to, they're just people and organizations that aren't going to like that because it doesn't fit with their ideology. Same really can be said for the book that I wrote, The Truth About You. There are people that are going to read it. I'm going to go on record right now that are absolutely going to hate it because it doesn't follow the narrative that they want to be told about domestic violence.
Oh, they're gonna come for you, my friend. I can. It's
You
not
know,
an if.
but the title of the book is has the word truth in there, and that's how I'm looking at this. Is that my job is to tell the truth. My job is to give a voice to the people and to the issues that are right now not being talked about. So I want to just say this is one of the reasons I really, really appreciate being on your show and having the opportunity to talk about this.
And again, going back to the book, there's a journey that goes on in there with Lucy that is really the one that I think you want people to go on, right? Is to understand that it's not black and white, it's gray. You may think certain things, right? In this particular case, Greg's the evil person, but there's other things that aren't being taken into account there. And that's kind of what I was trying to get the flavor of before, because you are addressing what is the reality the majority of the time, right? These situations, while they're on a spectrum, nothing's black and white with it, but you're addressing the realities of it all. And you kind of said that's why you went fiction, because you're trying to bring in all these different concepts. And to what you're just talking about, these other groups are never going to read that book with an open mind, and they're going to come for you. I guarantee you they're going to come for you, right? Because they've come for me I don't know how many times.
Well, yeah, and Dan, there are people like you, and I hope a lot of your listeners that are going, yeah, this is the truth. I'm on board. There are people, like you just said, that are on the other side that are never going to waver. And what I hope is that the people in the middle who are open or really haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about, reading about, learning about this issue will have enough of an open mind that we can at least illuminate that truth for them. So,
And that's what you're doing in the book, though, right? Is you're putting it in a way, this is going to sound really bad, that's palatable, right? Because, again, going back to the statistics we talked about earlier, people see them, and if you agree with them, you'll throw them out there constantly. That's what they do, right? If you don't agree with them, we lose our minds and try and disprove them, right? And I do some of that, to be fair. But in reality, though, if we come at it from a different perspective and look at the human beings behind the statistics and why they do what they do on both sides, and I'm in no way trying to excuse domestic violence in any way, shape, or form, but
I don't know.
It's a better approach to solving the problem than what we've done for 50 years now, which has not solved the problem. You look at VAWA or VAWA, whatever way you want to, I say VAWA, but Violence Against Women Act has poured billions and billions of dollars into this problem, and we are nowhere in 30 years. I mean, it came out in 94. It's 2025 as we're doing this, so 31 years, nothing's changed. The very same things they were saying in 1994, they're saying right now. So how about we get rid of that and look at programs like yours, fund them, support them, and hey, maybe we can actually bring about some change. What a novel concept, don't you think?
Well, Dan, and I love what you said about looking at it on both sides. And I hope what the readers will discover in reading the truth about you is some of Greg's story comes out. Lucy has a conversation or several conversations with him throughout the book, but some of his background comes out of, where did he grow up? What circumstances? What was it like? What did he experience? What was he particularly sensitive about? What caused him to be reactive? And what did he learn that he could undo some of that sensitivity and that reactivity? So there's Greg's story, and I hope people see that. But there's also Paula's story. And, I've shared enough here that, Paula's doing some really hurtful things that we would argue are abusive as well in this relationship. And you're going to get a glimpse of her backstory. And especially when you meet her mother, Grandma Connie, in the story. you're going to see the dynamics between those two women, the mother and the daughter. And I hope you'll go, oh, this makes perfect sense to me now, why she might be the way she is.
Can I tell you, when I was reading about Connie, that's my ex-wife's mother. I mean, it's like you took, it's
You
like
have
you
a mother-in-law like that.
had a mother. It was her
Yeah.
to a T, right? And that's why I can so resonate with that, and I think it's fair to say that's probably the case in a lot of the instances. Again, we're generalizing, but the reality is what we're talking about is the majority of cases, and
Right.
that's not to dismiss anything, but by not having the conversation, we are dismissing things. We have to
Yeah.
acknowledge that perpetrators often have been abused themselves. It's not to excuse their behavior and what they've done, but we're not going to change it if we don't accept that reality and work with them so that they can heal, so that they're not so reactive. I mean, again, I'll be upfront and say I don't have a lot of love for perpetrators. I mean, because I've heard I mean, yeah, I understand. I'm hear
I
the
get
horror
it.
stories on the back end, but I also have sympathy for them because I understand it. Not as much as I
Well,
need to, though, right? And that's where this book was helping me, and I'm still conflicted by it. I have to be honest with you, right?
good.
I want to hate Greg. I'm going to be honest with you. I want to hate the man, okay? And I'm clouded because of my experience. So what this has done, though, is go, Dan, your experience is not the whole truth, right? And the lesson I take from the book is that I need to do more to understand.
Well,
And that's
and
what I think your goal was, right? And
absolutely.
you did it with
And
me.
and Dan, to your point, can we hate the abuse? Can we hate the behavior, but not hate the person? And when we start being able to say, I hate the sin, but we don't have to hate the sinner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's a really healthy place for us to get. I don't want anybody to think that I or this book are advocating that abuse is okay. No, it's not. Um, and sometimes and this is, I've received criticism this way as well. You talked about criticism from other people and other organizations of when we talk about what causes the abuse. Oh, you're just giving abusers an excuse. Oh, I was hurt. I was locked in a closet as a child, and that's why I'm abusive. No, but understanding the cause helps lead to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's important. Understanding and identifying the correct cause doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps us understand it and it helps us heal it. And that's what's really important. And just to say, well, I'm going to, shut my eyes and my ears to all information about what might have caused this, we end up with both hands tied behind our back when we go to try to fix it.
Help me to help people. Okay, so again, I'm still conflicted on a lot of what was in the book and all that, and I understand. I take responsibility for that, right? How do, like, when someone's reading the book and let's say they are like me, and I have a feeling it's gonna be a lot of people, right? Because you're challenging beliefs. You're challenging, as much as I understand perpetrators to a certain extent. I will be the first to tell you I don't understand them, right? And that's why I'm so conflicted with some of this stuff. How can I move forward, right? So that I can help others to move forward by saying, let's extend an olive branch, if you will, and get a better understanding, get a conversation going. How do we, I guess what I'm saying is, do we as a society get things moving in the right direction?
I, I think we start again with the right understanding of what causes people to cause harm in their relationships. When we start with that correct understanding, now when we approach that person, we can say, hey, what you're doing here isn't good. It's not only hurting your partner, but it's hurting you. It's keeping you from having the kind of loving quality relationship that I bet you want. And oh, by the way, that doesn't have to be the case. I'm guessing it's no fun for you to get angry all the time. It's no fun for you to feel picked on. It's no fun for you to feel hurt that much, right? And so when we start there, we can probably connect with those folks, and we can also say, there's help. It doesn't have to be this way for you. And we can point them in the right direction towards resources that are really helpful, and we can encourage them to take that journey. So I think that starting point is different. Now, on the victim side, letting the victim know this person may be doing this because of the baggage, the emotional wounds that they're carrying around. There's a danger that we're encouraging them to stay in an abusive relationship or situation. And I don't want to do that. But I think that also leads to kind of balancing, like they have this baggage and they need to address it. And so what you should be looking for is that they actually address it. And I don't mean that they check boxes. I went to this program, I went to counseling 14 times, whatever, but about watching their behavior and understanding what have they learned about themselves and how are they thinking about those situations differently, and are you actually seeing them respond in, maybe you're watching from a safe distance, maybe you live apart and you're just getting together once a week for coffee and a conversation or whatever. Are you seeing them respond differently to the same old stuff that they used to do something really hurtful in? And if you are, there's hope for your relationship. If you're not, you have a wounded person and you can't heal them. They have to make that decision for themselves, and they have to take that journey for themselves. And I think that would be a lot more honest thing that we could be telling victims, which is not to give them false hope that, hey, this person's fine. He went to the program and so he's fine or she's fine, but also not to give them, what's the opposite of hope? Like, this is never going to work. They're never going to change. That's
Right.
not giving them the truth either.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not that black and white. It's a spectrum, and it's we're getting short on time. I just want to cover a couple things real quick. One of the things that I think that I've seen with the men that I work with, and you've touched on this a couple of times, is they don't want to get out of the relationship, right?
Right.
They want to figure it out. They want to work it out. Men are fixers. They'll ask me all the time, how do I fix this, Dan? And I struggle with that, right? Even though I'm coming at it from, well, here's what you need to do to protect yourself, blah, blah, blah. Surveillance being one of them. But, I guess where I'm going is, for those men that are in these high conflict, abusive relationships, and I'm coming at it from the victim perspective, but I'm also going to ask as far as the accused side or the perpetrator side, or maybe even someone, because I see this too as like, I think my sister's being abused, or I think, well, in this case, it was, stepfather abusing a mother, that kind of stuff. How can we give the advice to these people to help them, kind of like what I was just saying to you, and it may be the same answer, to what should they be aware of? What can they do specifically? Like, how do they find help? Because if they go to the local domestic violence shelter and you're a man, you're screwed. Sorry. They're not going to help you. I'll tell you right, point blank, you're not the victim, you're the perpetrator, end of discussion. So how, knowing all of that, I just threw a whole lot in the pot, stir it up for me, okay, and give me your best advice in those situations to help men who are in these relationships that want to heal them as best they can. What can they do? Or if they're not in it directly, but they're affiliated with someone who might be in one, what can they do to help them?
Yeah, Dan, I'm going to give you the answer from the perspective of a person who's actually in that relationship, because I think that's maybe the easier answer.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you the same thing that I tell people who are in our group, who are identifying with mutual abuse when we talk about that as a topic, which, oh, by the way, I know of no other domestic violence perpetrator program that talks about the very real concept of mutual abuse. Again, to your point, if we don't talk about it, how can we help anybody?
Hmm.
So, what I tell them is unequivocally, no matter what happens, no matter what your partner does, clean up your side of the street first. Look, we all bring something to our relationships. We all bring a certain amount of probably bad behavior, hurtful things, challenging things. Clean up your side of the street first. Now that will cover if, like, I'm really the person that's causing the most harm, but I don't think so. I don't know it. Cleaning up my side of the street will absolutely change the dynamic of that relationship. Even if you don't, then it's a lot easier to go to stage two and ask your partner to, let your partner know what they're doing that's hurtful and ask them to stop, ask them to change. It's basic boundary setting of saying, I don't like it when you yell at me, when you belittle me, when you call me names, when whatever it is that they're doing that's hurtful. Tell them what it is and ask them to stop. And then to take the boundary part of it further is, if they're not working on that, if they're either don't see it, don't want to change, then your job is to create more and more separation in that relationship, spend more and more time apart from them. Eventually, and this can happen where you just say, this is not a healthy relationship for me. I've I pointed out what they're doing that's hurtful. I've tried to clean up my side of the street. I'm not perfect, but I've worked on my issues, and I'm asking my partner to do the same. And if they don't, then you have that really tough decision of, is this worth staying in this relationship? Is this even healthy for me to stay in the relationship? And I think, if it's somebody that that same advice makes sense, is to say, okay, look at your part, because we all love to be blind to our part. Clean that up as best you can, but at the same, or after you do that, then ask your partner to clean up their part, and set some boundaries around that. And they're either going to respond. And oh, by the way, good boundaries of saying, I don't want to be in a relationship with you if you're doing that. I don't want to be around you if you're doing that, is actually the best pressure we can give somebody to motivate them to change. It doesn't always work, but it's the best, and it's also appropriate and healthy pressure that we can put in that relationship.
Yeah, I mean it's going more into addressing the real issue as opposed to what is done now, which is just cut them apart from each other and let
Right.
them go sink or swim. And
Throw the bum out.
it's proven for, well, under VEWA since 1994, it's failed miserably. So why keep repeating it? Definition of insanity again. Michael, this has been so good. We're actually over on time, and I don't care. It's a great conversation, but um, you know, I want to give you a chance to give a final thought with the audience on anything that we've talked about or something we didn't, to really kind of help them understand your goal behind the book and why they should go read it, because I think it's important they do. But better it come from you than little old me. So go ahead.
Well, Dan, I'll give it a shot. My purpose in writing the book is to show different aspects of domestic violence and those relationships and those people. And I hope that anybody that picks up the book and reads it will learn something, will have their eyes open. And I really hope that they're open minded enough to have maybe preconceived notions and assumptions that they held challenged a little bit, and their perspective shifted in some way that brings it closer to reality, closer to the truth. Again, there's a reason why the word truth is part of the title. Is It's really trying to tell the truth about this issue, and I hope I've done that in a way that's engaging and that challenges you, and also I encourage you, if you've got a book club, if you want to talk about it with your Aunt Sarah or your Uncle Ben or whoever it is, I encourage you to talk about it and share with them what you learned and maybe what you're wrestling with. Dan, you said you were wrestling with some of this stuff in the book, and I think that's good. That was my objective.
And you achieved it with me, and that's why I encourage people to go and get the book and read it, because that's when you know a book is good, right? If you can read a book and you're not responding to it emotionally, whether in whatever form, you could be excited about it, angry, kind of like me, confused in some ways, and what the hell, wait a minute, and that kind of stuff, because that's what was happening to me, right? Because I admit, I come at it from one side more so than the other, and you challenged me to rethink things. And the promise I'll make to you is that moving forward, I'm going to look at it from that, right? And so, at least with me, I think you achieved your goal with the book. And that's why I encourage people to
Cool.
go and get it and read it, because we all want to believe that what we think is right. And I'm as guilty of it. I'm sure you are in some ways too, right? We all are. It's
Absolutely.
human nature. But we're not always right. And almost inevitably, in some way, we're wrong, even as right as we might be, if put it in a weird way. But by having, again, it goes back to what we've said many times. It opens the dialogue and actually leads us down a path where we can effect true change and help people, which is really, in the end, the goal.
Well, Dan, you made my day because when I wrote the book, I told myself if I can cause one person to have their beliefs challenged, I'll feel like this whole endeavor was a success. So now I know that there's one person, everyone else is just gravy, it's just frosting on the cake. So
Well,
thank you.
well,
Thank
the
you for
good
that.
news is I got a platform to put it on there too. So
Yeah.
All right. So I guess we've talked about the book so much. How the hell can people get it, Michael?
Well, it is now live on Amazon, and I don't know what the lag is between us recording this and playing it. I hope to have both a Kindle and a print book up there shortly. Right now, the Kindle book is up. We'll have it in Audible if you prefer to listen to books, probably in a couple of months. And then, any place else that you go to buy books, especially online, but we'll be at a place where if you go into a bookstore and they don't have it on their shelf, they've got systems that they can look up and they can order it for you. So I our objective is to make this available for anybody. I'd love to think that some bookstore is going to order 100,000 copies. That might not happen, but any place you
That's
go
what
to
it
buy
does.
books, look for it. The Truth About You by Michael Clark, and I I hope that it's impactful. Some people write to entertain, and honestly, this is not a entertaining book. This is a thought-provoking book. So I hope it has that objective. If you're into that sort of thing.
In some ways, I think it's entertaining in a weird sort of way. But if you get my drift, because you get pulled
Good.
into the story, I guess that's where I'm going with it. And I'll put links down in the show notes to the Amazon. And yeah, hopefully it gets out in the bookstores, because I'm a big supporter of independent bookstores. And um, don't buy from Amazon if you can get it from them. But yeah, but for now, that's their only option, right? So go to Amazon. I'll put the links down below. One final thing, Michael, because I know you have websites, YouTubes, and all that. How can people follow you or your organization on social media?
Yeah. So for me personally, as an author, I have an account on X, formerly Twitter, and Blue Sky. So
Oh
those are
my
my
God, are
author
you?
social.
Oh, you're
Pardon
on
me.
Blue Sky?
Yeah, I'm on Blue. I don't know if anybody else is, but I
You're a
am.
brave man.
And so you can find me there. Also for the Ananias Foundation, we are also on X. We have a YouTube channel with videos, primarily geared for helping people change harmful behavior. We're on Facebook, and did I forget anything? And then, of course, there's our website, ananiasfoundation.org, is our website where you can come if you're someone who goes, some of this behavior that they're talking about, I kind of relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
That actually is kind of me sometimes, or I'm afraid it's me. You know, come to our website, check it out, check out the resources that we have. Everything that we offer is free. And so there's no charge. By the way, I don't, Dan, you didn't ask this, but I wrote this book and have invested in getting it published, but all the royalties go back to the Ananias Foundation. I refuse to make money for being abusive, so I don't pay myself for any of the work that I do in the Ananias Foundation, and I'm not going to collect any royalties off of this book either.
Amen for that, brother. I should have asked you that, and I applaud you for bringing that up and mentioning it, because it is an important thing, and people should know. So, Michael, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and really sharing the insights, writing the book. As I said, it's challenging, and it will make you rethink, especially if you're coming at it from the perspective that I did. And that's important that we do that, right? We need to open dialogue. So if nothing else, you've accomplished that right now with me, and I think with the audience. So thank you for being willing to come on and share your story and talk about the book.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This has been a fun conversation.
All right. On that note, we're going to go ahead and get things wrapped up. Guys, what a terrific show, right? I think Michael had a lot that he shared with us. And again, I encourage you to go get the book, because I think we can all agree that while, as he said, this was a quote-unquote fictional story that's in the book, the patterns within it, the actions within it are really reality, right? And whether you've been on the receiving end of abuse or the other side of it, or perpetrator, whether you've dealt with false allegations or dealt with the system's way it just grinds people up, as I often talk about, there's a lot to learn from reading this book and with an open mind and understanding it. And, you know, perhaps one of the biggest ones is the reality of protective orders. You know, there's some good to them, there's some bad to them, there's everything in between, and that is an important thing to take note of and have discussions on, and then take it forward, because we're not going to change the system by just reading a book and doing nothing, right? This can be your basis to start becoming proactive yourself. You don't necessarily have to be a victim of domestic violence or a perpetrator. It may have never been in your life, but you can help others by getting out and talking about it. And this book can help you. If you've never really understood how to do that, this book can help you start down that path. So I highly, highly encourage you to go and get it. All right. On that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. If you've enjoyed the show, do me a favor, hit that like button, thumbs up. It helps the algorithm, pushes the show out. And hey, leave comments down below. Share your thoughts and experiences. I want to hear them. I'm sure Michael's going to jump in and check them out. The more that we talk about the issues, but in particular domestic violence, the more we share what we've experienced, or whether it's ourselves or others, the sooner we can get things addressed and fixed. And ultimately, that is the goal. All right, until next time, this is Dan. Stay sharp, stay aware, and hey, take care of yourselves and the people you love. See you next time.